Imagine your last name is worth $1 billion, and you still have to work a regular job. For one of America's most famous families, that isn't a hypothetical. It's how their fortune actually worked. That family is the Kennedys, a fortune long called one of the great American money machines, kept alive through a maze of family trust. So here's the question almost nobody thinks to ask. If your name is tied to that kind of wealth, why would any Kennedy ever need a regular job? Why go to college? Why work as a lawyer, a teacher, a 9-to-5 like the rest of us, just to make ends meet? I know, this is starting to sound like a conspiracy theory. It isn't. The cleanest way to see what's really going on is to open up the trust and look at the rules inside. So picture a vault. The family fortune is inside. Real, huge, glowing. Every heir can see it. They just don't hold the key. They can't access it on their own terms whenever they want. Instead, there's a small faucet on the side of that vault. It drips out an income, a steady little stream, and somebody else controls the tap. That vault and that faucet are the whole episode. Hold on to them. Because a trust isn't a box where rich people hide money. At its most powerful, it's a rule machine and a privacy shield for the family. It decides who gets in, when, and how much. That's the part everybody misses when they hear trust fund. You picture the trust fund kid, the one in your class with the Mercedes and the sunglasses, coasting into the Ivies, never working a day. You picture someone who owns a fortune. But a beneficiary isn't always an owner. Sometimes you just get the drip. The vault stays locked. That's the Kennedy paradox. The fortune is real. The income is real. The name is real. The control, that sits somewhere else entirely. Stick with me. Because once we do the math on who actually shares that faucet, rich is going to start looking very different. And you won't see old money or your own paycheck the same way again. So who built the vault? To find out, we go backward. Time reported that Joseph P. Kennedy set up family trusts as early as 1926, then another in 1936, and another in 1949. 3 trusts across about 20 years. Here's the first surprise. This isn't an app or a website where an heir taps withdraw. This is old money infrastructure, paper, trustees, terms, dates, generations, legalese, and that legalese controls the faucet. And why build it this way at all? A few reasons: to keep any single generation from blowing the whole thing, to dodge the classic trust fund kid trap where easy money wrecks the kid, to keep the family's business private, and to help the fortune survive the 2 things that come for everyone: death and taxes. Time reported that the 1949 trust settled portions of the Kennedy wealth on 28 grandchildren. Sit with that for a second. One man, almost a century ago, wrote rules to govern dozens of people who weren't even born yet. Then, the family grows. Children become parents. Grandchildren become senators and public figures. Great-grandchildren inherit a world the founder never saw. The man is long gone, but those rules he wrote, they keep right on talking for him from beyond the grave. Now here's where it gets a little weird and a lot more concrete. Time reported that when John F. Kennedy became president, his disclosed holdings under the family trust were about $10 million. That produced roughly $500,000 of income a year, and after taxes, a little over $100,000. There's your vault and your faucet in real numbers. The vault, $10 million of assets. The faucet, a few $100,000 a year of income off of it. And what actually lands in a pocket after the government's cut, smaller still. And yes, back then the top tax brackets ran as high as 90%, so the government's cut really was that brutal. The vault was huge, but the income dripping off it was only a modest slice. And the assets inside were never the same thing as cash you can spend. That's what a well-built trust does. It turns a fortune into a controlled stream. It protects the pool and it limits the person standing right next to it. So we've established it. An heir can see the vault. They might even know exactly what the assets inside are worth, but all they actually get is the drip from the income faucet. So to really understand the trust, let's split it into 2 parts, because this is what unlocks everything else. The vault holds the principal, the trust's assets, all of it invested. The faucet is the income those assets throw off, the interest, the dividends, the rent earned on top of the principal. So if the trust owns stocks, real estate, a share of Apple, a building, all of that is principal sitting in the vault. It can be worth an absolute fortune. But owning the vault and being allowed to open it are two very different things. The document and the trustee decide what comes out of the faucet, how much, when, and who it goes to. And the real rule behind this, the Treasury's own breakdown of trust income spells out the split. The dividends, the interest, the rent, say, the rent off that building, that's income, the drip from the faucet. But the proceeds from selling the assets themselves, that house the trust owns, that Apple stock, that generally counts as principal, the contents of the vault. Here's the everyday version. A building can be worth millions, but the rent is the trickle you, as the beneficiary, actually live on. A portfolio can be enormous, but the dividends and interest are the cash flow, and usually the only part the beneficiaries are allowed to touch. And this is exactly where it gets interesting for the Kennedys. The trust throws off millions in income every year, but there are so many Kennedy heirs that it gets divided among them, which shrinks what any one person actually pockets. Say a typical share works out to around $10 million of principal. You can't grab that $10 million. You live off the income it throws. Call it 3 to 5%. So very roughly $200,000 to $500,000 a year before taxes.
Rough numbers, but you get the shape of it.
And honestly, 200 grand a year landing in your lap, most of us would take that in a heartbeat. But picture the life a Kennedy is raised to expect. Private schools, a place in the city and a place on the water, travel, a public name to keep up. Against that, a few hundred grand a year is a very comfortable salary. It is not never work again money. Now, what if a beneficiary tries to go past the income and sell the assets to get at the real money? In a lot of trusts, that sale belongs to the vault, not to the beneficiary, not even to the trustee. And if the trust was set up properly, not even to the grantor who created it in the first place. So next time you hear they've got a trust fund, the question isn't how big is the vault? The better question is, what does the trust actually let them touch? Can they take income? Can they crack open the principal for a car, a down payment on a house? Can the trustee tell them no? Do the rules loosen with age? A lump sum at a certain birthday, a graduation gift? All of it written out by someone a century ago, still calling the shots today. That gap between standing next to the money and actually controlling it is the whole game. Which is why the cleanest line in the Kennedy story is this: they may be beneficiaries of $1 billion fortune. That doesn't mean they own $1 billion. Now watch what happens when a whole bunch of trust fund babies have to sip from the same income tap. A fortune that feels enormous in one generation gets concentrated fast and messier in the next. The branches multiply and they keep multiplying. More and more people have a claim on the same vault, but the vault doesn't automatically grow to match. In fact, just to keep everyone whole, it has to do something quietly heroic. Out-earn inflation, outpace a growing family, and still be a careful, sound investment all at once. So who's actually steering this? Usually two people. There's the trustee, the one running operations, coordinating the heirs, representing the trust, because the trust is its own legal entity and it needs a human at the wheel. And then there's often a second pro, a portfolio manager, another fiduciary whose whole job is the investments sitting inside the vault. So how does the trustee manage all of it? Not by swinging for the fences on one hot stock. They have to invest the way a careful, reasonable person would. Spread the risk, diversify, aim for solid overall return, and never bet the family's future on a single roll. They're juggling a whole system at once, keeping the trust alive for future generations, throwing off enough income for the people living on it today, handling the taxes, and staying true to the trust's original purpose, which for the Kennedys is keeping the legacy going. And the vault can quietly change what's inside it. PBS reported that the family's merchandise mart and other properties sold back in 1998 for around $625 million, and that afterward, the family's assets were mostly securities. Real estate turned into a portfolio. The contents of the vault changed, but the vault itself, the locks, the rules, the mechanisms, those didn't budge. So as the family grows, that $1 billion fortune stops looking like one giant check. It's really a whole network of faucets, claims, branches, and documents, which is why a billion-dollar family and a billionaire heir are not the same sentence. One describes the vault structure, the other describes who actually holds the key. And here's the slightly funny part. The more heirs the family adds, the thinner everyone's drip gets, unless those investments really cook. Somewhere, a financial advisor is quietly rooting for a small family reunion. Here's the part that makes a trust both brilliant and a little ruthless. The same feature that makes it powerful is the one that can turn it into a trap. It protects the money from one generation's greed, their debt, their worst money decisions. But that exact same lock can shield the money from the next generation's wishes, even the good ones. Let me show you both sides, because this is the heart of it. This is the spendthrift idea. Picture an heir who gets handed loose control of his branch's share, and say the documents let him reach the principal. He could sell off the assets, drain the vault, and blow it all in his own lifetime on whatever he wants, leaving nothing for his kids or their kids. That is the exact nightmare the grantor, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., the founder who built this thing, wrote the trust to prevent. And quick note, grantor, founder, I'll use those interchangeably. It just means the person who created the trust. But blocking the next generation's wishes isn't always the villain. Flip it. Imagine a beneficiary who's disabled, can't work through no fault of their own, and the income alone doesn't cover their medical care. A well-built trust or a court can let the trustee release extra money from the principal to actually take care of them. Same lock, completely different outcome. It's blocking wishes while allowing protection for a beneficiary in need. So can these rules ever change? Yes, but it's rare and it's hard. Under the kind of rules most states share, an irrevocable trust can be modified with the beneficiaries on board, but only if a court agrees the change doesn't break a material purpose of the trust. Courts can also step in for genuinely unanticipated circumstances, like that disabled heir, when the change actually serves what the trust was for, but it's slow, it's expensive, and it is never casual. And look at the red tape standing in the way. Material purpose. Your reason has to actually matter to the trust's own document. A court, you're going in front of a judge through the whole legal process, the trust's purpose, the mission it was created for in the first place. That is not a family group chat voting that the rules are annoying. And that's the real lesson of the Kennedy money machine. It didn't just hand down money, it handed down a legacy protecting machine. It split the benefit of the fortune from the control of it. Income from principal. The family name from the right to actually cash out. That protection can preserve a dynasty. It can also become a cage made of good intentions. The founder writes the rule book, the trustee holds the keys, and the beneficiaries live with the result. So look, there's no doubt the Kennedys are worth billions. The real question is how much of it they actually own or control. And that's the hidden system. The trust protects the fortune from death, from taxes, from an heir's worst decisions. And in the end, it also keeps the trust fund babies from a soft, lavish, difficulty-free life. So next time you see a trust fund kid, don't ask how much they have, ask how much they actually control.
Next episode, we keep dissecting these things. The difference between a trust that you can change and a trust that can outlive your control. Maybe even outlive you. Subscribe to Edge Dive for more.